Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Today's guest is Jenny Kramer from our road trip to Cornell. The conversation was so entertaining, we're joining the interview midpoint. Here's Jenny's background before we join her. Jenny is an educator with Cornell Garden-Based Learning. She's an ecologist turned enthusiastic horticulture educator with 25 years of experience in organic gardening, regenerative agriculture, natural history, and botanical education. She loves teaching students how to create a resilient, abundant, and beautiful garden ecosystem by applying ecological principles. She also has a book coming out in the very near future, so listen in. This is going to be fun. One of the subtopics is regenerative agriculture, and from there you're going into eco-restoration and ecological gardening. Want to explain a little bit of that to us? It all sounds really good, but we don't really know or understand the details.
We will start with how is ecological gardening different than just gardening? I'd like to think that way back when, all gardening was ecological gardening. I don't know how many generations we have to go in all of our ancestors, but at some point, the template for how to grow plants came from a native ecosystem. Ancestors way back, indigenous people forever, have observed ecosystems and then watched how food is produced there, and then how can I do this at the place where I live, or in a little bit more controlled environment with a little more emphasis on food. So when we're looking at ecological gardening, we are looking at the ecosystem. And if I can back up just a little bit, when you look at an ecosystem, in the model that I subscribe to, we call it the pieces, patterns, and processes model. And so pieces are just the things that are in your garden. So it could be the plants, it could be the insects, the soil, the rocks, the water, just individual things. Then there's the patterns. That's how those are arranged on the landscape, both in space and in time. Right? So we have pieces and they're in patterns. Well, what helps those pieces stay in those patterns? It's processes. And so processes in the garden are things like photosynthesis, decomposition, nitrogen fixation, all these things that are happening to make an ecosystem function, to make predation is another one. So critters that eat other critters, right? That's really important for your garden. If you have a bug that's not great for your plants, as long as there's another critter in your garden that eats that bug, you're probably not going to have your system out of balance. So in ecological gardening, we are trying to restore those processes by putting all the right pieces in all the right patterns.
Are we being a little bit more passive then? Because maybe my first reaction would be when I see that bug to go spray that bug, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit earlier before we started recording about generations. My dad, and I think this was very true of people in the 50s and 60s and 70s, sprayed the heck out of their plants. He had these beautiful hybrid tea roses and they were pretty artificial looking, and he sprayed a lot, right? So is it that we're not doing those things, or we're doing some active things as well?
Well, to address your first question about is it passive, I would say in the very beginning, when you first start ecological gardening, there is a little hill to climb that's very active, because we're talking about a system that's probably really disruptive, maybe because it's recovering from that type of treatment. And we need to get a lot of those pieces back in the right patterns, and those processes that are absent, we need to bring them back. That could be a little bit of effort in the beginning. Maybe, let's just say, for example, your soil organic matter is pretty depleted. You might be adding a lot of compost for a little while and doing a lot of cover crops. But at some point you hit a point where now you've tipped the balance, and now the ecosystem has enough of those processes recovered that they're doing their thing, they're doing their feedback loops, and all of a sudden the work goes way down.
Is there a way you know that you've hit that balance?
I think the biggest way you would know is your plants look healthier, you have fewer pest problems, and you're just like, oh, look at that. I didn't use much compost this year. Also, maybe your soil just looks darker and your tilth is better. And when you go to stick your shovel in the ground, you don't have to work so hard to get it in there because your soil texture is improved. So there's a lot of ways. Also water resilience. You'll store water better. You'll shed water better. So all these things that are just happen in the ecosystem. What I like to think about is an ecologically balanced garden will only have so to speak, an emergency or a crop failure when there is a catastrophe, right? That's when we see that in nature, right? Like there's a hurricane and a forest blows down, right? You're going to have that all the time in ecology and on the planet, but we're not going to have every single year an outbreak of a disease because we've now put in all those things that control disease. So we're only going to have an outbreak of disease when it's a disastrous year for that disease.
So can I play devil's advocate? Because I totally agree with you about all of this, and I'm trying to practice this. But what about all these? What about things like invasive plants, and what about things like invasive earthworms? I mean, you can't be passive with those, right? I mean, you have to do something, right?
Yeah, well, I think that there, again, we have a little bit of an issue with a balance because a soil that is out of balance, let's just say that all of the invasive species have conditions under which they thrive and conditions under which they don't. And some of those conditions have to do with soils that are depleted or soils that are compacted or not even having the right seed predators in the soil, right? So when we're better in balance, those invasions are much easier. They're lower, but they're also much easier to deal with. For example, when you think about pulling weeds in your garden, when you have a super compacted clay soil, it's not easy to get a weed out of the ground. When you have a good water balance and a good soil tilth, you pull those weeds and you get things under control. And I always joke, I teach a class in weed ecology, and I always joke that I'm like the worst teacher for that class because I don't really have very many weeds in my garden. And it's not because I spray anything, and it's not because I'm somehow protected from the weeds. It's because I've created a habitat that is more conducive to the plants that I want to grow than it is to weeds. And I've also used techniques to keep their
You need to come to your house.
Yeah, come on over.
No, I'll just get all envious. So what you're kind of doing by recreating this balance to head off the invasive everybody's is to undo the stress that we've actually created within the soil and the environment. We made that happen so that they're more susceptible to the invasives.
And what's so cool is we made that happen, so why can't we make the opposite happen?
Yeah.
Look how powerful we are. We can just change the ecosystem back in the opposite direction using these regenerative practices.
It sounds like you should write a book on this topic, doesn't it?
Why would you write a book?
Why don't you write a book on this topic?
If you wrote a book, what would you call it?
Well, it's funny because the publisher just asked me the other day if they could change the title. So
come on, don't let them
right
do
now
that.
the working title is Ecological Gardening in the Northeast. I think that's going to change. There's now 2 books instead of 1 book.
Okay. We do
tell
that with 2
anyone.
podcasts.
Yeah, no, we will tell no one.
So, but the book is essentially about gardening in the 4 seasons in a way that is climate-wise. It's geared toward the Northeast. And the idea is to help people grow abundant food, habitat, beauty, medicine, whatever they want to grow in a way that utilizes these ecosystem principles and just takes all the guesswork out of it for the gardener. So the book is actually a handbook. It's meant to be carried into the garden, and it just tells you what to do.
It's only 2 books?
Can I
It's
pre-order?
only 2 books so far. Yeah, you can. You can, yeah.
So give me some processes that I want to hear some real life examples of some processes that you might incorporate into your garden to start putting things in balance. Would it be, you said compost, you probably wouldn't be wanting to bring things from the outside because that might bring other bad things, right? So give me some examples.
Well, I think one of the easiest place for every gardener to start is companion planting. So in an ecosystem, we have plants, then we have maybe pollinators that pollinate those plants. Those get a lot of press. But there's this other suite of bugs and insects and invertebrates that don't get as much press. They're called the natural enemies, and they are critical to the functioning of the ecosystem. So you can imagine this name, natural enemies. These are the bugs and critters that eat or compete with the bugs that hurt your plants.
Our allies.
They're your allies,
Okay.
right? So they're on your team, and we have taken their habitat out of the garden. So the easiest way to get free pest control, and what's so cool is it's super beautiful free pest control, sometimes super beautiful and edible free pest control, is to start planting companion plants.
There's like a drum roll here. I don't know what these plants are.
Well, I'll tell you, the easiest place to start are the aromatic herbs. So these are things like parsley and mint and sage and thyme. All of those chemicals that create those aromas, they're pest repellent. They're natural pest repellents. So you're getting those in there. You're going to keep a lot of the bad bugs away. The classic we all know about is marigolds, right? So they have a scent as well.
But that really works.
And it really works.
They got to be the right marigold.
Yes. And
well,
so
that's some fancy thing.
You know, the more natural, the better.
Right.
And then the flip side of that is also getting in flowers that draw in another whole suite of these beneficial insects. And so this is anything, basically almost any flower is going to do the trick, but there are some that work better than others. Some of my favorites are zinnias and cosmos and nasturtiums and borage. And then you can go into some perennials like echinacеas are a great one too.
So far, that's all free range at my house.
Exactly. So look at you. You're already doing it.
Me too.
So
We're doing the right thing. We can end now. No,
We're gone.
So that's I find that to be a really easy place for people
So
to
what
start.
do they bring in? Like praying mantises? Like what do they bring in then?
There's all sorts of stuff, soldier beetles,
Killer
and
bugs.
yes, all these different things that come in. And so remember, some of them are driving bugs away, others are bringing them in, and essentially we're looking to bring in a lot of those predatory insects.
Okay.
Lacewings a lot of people love their favorites are lacewings.
No, I got a definition question. Companion planting, companion plants. Define that. There are 1,000 different definitions of companion planting.
There really are so many things, but I would just say a companion plant is any plant that in some way benefits another plant.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be like a row of these 6 things that all help each other out and do stuff.
No, and the thing is, if you wanted to get super scientific, you could be like, okay, I've got Colorado potato beetles. So what eats Colorado potato beetles? And what plant does that need? And so I'm going to plant that plant. That's not how I do things. That's just not my style. I'm more of an if you build it, they will come kind of gal. And I just make sure that I plant everything and lots of it, right? So I just look at the list of companion plants and I stick them all in there.
But that's like a great strategy, period, right? Because the more diverse your plants are, whether they're natives or annuals or what, the more diverse your insects are going to be, right?
Exactly.
And more diverse your birds are going to be then because they're going to eat the insects.
And there's a lot of ways you can think about diversity. I think we think a lot when we're thinking about diversity in plant families or maybe in bloom time, right? We know we need to have something in bloom all the time. There's a lot of other ways you can think about it. You could think about plant height because different things like to live at different levels of the garden canopy. You could think about flower color, flower shape. You can even, if you want to get super nerdy, start to think about the type of the roots because we're also thinking about the beneficial insects and invertebrates that live underground. So there's just a lot of different ways we can think about it, how long lived a plant is. So we think a lot in our gardens about annuals, starting to integrate some perennials into there can also attract a whole other suite of critters that need a more long-lived habitat.
I mean, does this include also, I mean, in your category of companion plants, I assume you'd include plants that you wouldn't really think of as beautiful, like host plants for butterflies and moths too, that, if you're especially trying to attract a particular type of insect or butterfly or moth, that you'd be planting things like, or leaving things like nettle or something like that. Because,
I love nettle.
Yeah, because people eat nettle, but also it's like a great host plant, right? So maybe there's some rough areas in your lawn or area that you just want to leave natural, right? I mean, is that a strategy? I
think there's gradations. Like you mentioned your father or your grandfather's tea roses. So they're like, let's call them one extreme, and then we could call some field, basically old field. Jean's yard, another extreme. And then there's gradations in between there. And I like to think of, the most cultivated areas that I want to have, they're probably not going to have nettles in them. And then I'm going to think about other areas that I'm like, okay, I really love the wild look here. And I do think part of becoming ecological gardeners is part of learning how to change our vision and see what we see as beautiful. It's like, I think about all the hairdos and the beehives in the 1950s and how that was beautiful. And, now we've got a little bit more wild look with our hair, and we can do the same thing, changing our perspective in the garden of what beauty is.
Do you think that's difficult? I know a lot of people are much more aware, and I think I'm hearing more and more about it, but do you think that's culturally difficult to do? I mean, you go to a big box store and people are buying everything that's in bloom, and most of it isn't native, right? Some of it is. But so culturally, like, how do we move there?
It's a great point. And I'm hoping that most of your listeners, right, are gardeners or nature calls are people who love nature. So I think part of it is really us creating beautiful demonstrations in our yards of what could be. And then also us making the choices, at least us first and foremost, to not go to the box store, to go to, the native plant nursery or the local farmer that also does propagation, or at least the local garden center, and focus on putting our money there. You're going to get more resilient plants anyway, way cooler varieties. So that's a great place to start. And then just like inviting people over into your garden, have a conversation with your neighbors. Buy your friends and neighbors plants as gifts.
Now,
the
I
plants
thought
you
were
want them
gonna
to
say
plant.
wine.
It's like buying art, though, isn't it? I mean, don't you get yourself into trouble when you do
Maybe
that?
not. I think everyone there's a few plants out there that everyone likes. Like, I think echinacea falls in that category.
That's one of my favorite plants.
I mean,
of course.
yes. So same with me. And I've found a lot that I like to push those limits a little bit and get somebody a gift like that.
Well, what I do once in a while, because I'm cheap, and I encourage,
frugal.
No, cheap.
Okay.
I encourage everything to reseed, so naturally I get too much of everything. So I put out a call. I've got a list, and I have a thinning. Everyone's told to bring their 5-gallon buckets. I've got enough shovels, and that's how we
I'm going to give the disclaimer, though. You
Jim
really
is
don't
not
want
invited.
No, you don't want to dig up things if you think you might have something bad on your soil, though, right? I mean, you don't want to spread the word that you should be digging up plants and giving them to people if you might have something like jumping worms in your soil, right?
Well, here's what I'll say about that, because I think that
we got to fix the soil, right? So they're not welcome.
Yeah, we might have to fix the soil, but also let's just take example. Well, first of all, I will tell you with jumping worms, if you are digging up plants, you can triple washing the roots. Usually will solve that problem.
I'll triple wash them.
Please triple wash.
Triple wash your roots.
Fine.
And I do think that I'm not advocating for the spread of jumping worms, but I wouldn't want the presence of jumping worms to eliminate our ability to get companion plants out there all across the landscape.
No,
so
but
we
you
have
can do it. You can do it in a way. You can go buy an echinacea too. I'll buy you an echinacea to give to someone. Or you
just
could,
triple wash it.
Or you can give someone echinacea seeds.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
I have hoses. I will triple wash. The point is to move
Please
plants.
triple wash.
You can triple wash them. And I hate to say it, but with the jumping worms, it does seem inevitable that at some point
It's
most of us are going to
ubiquitous.
have
Yeah.
them.
Okay. It is.
I didn't
true.
have them until 2 years ago, but now I
It's
have
a pretty depressing thing, though. So, I mean, you just don't want to give it to somebody. Anyway, I'm done with my soapbox.
You don't know
jumping
who's on my
worms.
list.
Well, that's another story. No, but I think it's giving a plant is a great. I have this example of somebody bought a lot above us and started cutting down all the trees, and I actually went up to him with fear of being shot and said, like, you probably don't want to do that because of your drainage, because of everything else. And what happened was it ended up planting Norway maples, right, in place of that. So you do want to interact at least with your neighbors a little bit, at least maybe try to educate them, but it's a challenging thing, right?
Yeah, we have to do it in a neighborly way. And one of the things I love to do when I have that sort of a little bit of conflict is to just start with finding the places where we all agree and then start from there. So what is it that we agree on? We love trees. We love planting trees. Cool. What do we want the trees to do? Hey, you're wanting the trees for this thing. Hey, did you know that this tree supports more important caterpillars that the birds eat than this one?
I'm going to let you talk to my
Okay,
neighbor.
I'll talk to your neighbor.
I have a sister who doesn't know anything about gardening, and she's listening to this episode, and she says, "Oh, cool! I want to be an ecological gardener. How do I learn how, and what do I do first?"
Before the book comes out.
Before the book
Yeah, you
comes
buy my book.
Okay,
Yeah.
first you buy the book.
2024.
I'll buy her the book
Yeah.
and give it to her when she
can
comes.
take my course at gardenrhythm.com. I have an ecological gardening course.
Oh, we'll take that.
Oh.
Yep. Also, what do you do? Let's start with the idea that especially if you're a new gardener, that less is more, right? So less is more. So we're going to pick something we're excited about. Maybe it's soil, maybe it's flowers, maybe it's vegetables. And we're going to start small, and we're going to start by keeping those pieces in place that are already there. We're not going to get rid of them. So, I think the old way we used to all start a garden was rototill the heck out of it, maybe even spray something to kill everything that's there, like we're starting with a blank canvas. But actually, the stuff that's there, unless you are bought a place on a piece of land that was already pretty toxic, there's a lot of the building blocks are there, so don't get rid of them. if I was going to invite a new gardener into the world, I would probably start with sheet mulching a little spot, right? So we're going to start by taking the soil and the plants that are already there, and we're going to add a bunch more organic matter to it.
Talk about sheet mulching.
Okay.
What would you do then?
Sheet mulching is so cool because it's like almost free and it's so good for your soil. So if you're going to build a sheet mulch, there's a number of ways to do it. But let's just say we're starting with a lawn because that's simple. So you're starting with a piece of lawn. The first thing you're going to do is just mark out the edges that you want. I find it very helpful when you're starting a sheet mulch, if you're going to mark out your edges, to just dig a little mini trench around the edges that you like have a little delineation. So it's the only place we're going to do any digging. Then we're going to cover all the grass in cardboard. You can pull off the tape and the staples, no shiny bits, just regular brown cardboard boxes.
I've left some shiny bits on it still, right?
Yeah, it's better not. The inks, the inks are, the black inks are from soy, and some of those other ones, not so great, petroleum. So anyway, then we're going to start adding organic matter. Essentially what we're doing is we're building a really flat compost pile right on the ground. So we're going to start with things that are a little larger in size so we can get some air. So I like to start with, if I'm maybe pruning my apple trees, I take those little prunings and I cut them up and I put them on top of the cardboard. And let me just say the cardboard needs to be wet. So if it's not wet, raining, I always like to do this. Put the cardboard down the night I know it's going to rain all night, then build my sheet.
It really needs to be wet. What if it's not wet? Because I put down dry cardboard. What if it's not?
It's going to steal water from somewhere. It's not going to break down until it's wet. Decomposition is a process.
But there's no mistakes, really, right? I mean,
when do you want to plant this thing, right?
I'm patient.
Okay, so let's just say that
It's
Nancy
wet.
wants to
Nancy
start gardening
doesn't want to wait
ASAP,
for the
right?
cardboard.
All right.
She's not waiting. So she's going to either hose it down, soak it in a kiddie pool, or strategically time it with the rain. And then we're just starting to add things that contain a lot of carbon. These are generally brown things, but they're not always brown. And things that are that add nitrogen, generally green things, not always green though. For example, manure is something that contains nitrogen. It's brown, not green. So that whole browns and greens things.
What if my town cuts up trees and they give me free mulch that they've cut
you can
up?
use that.
That's good, right?
It's
a
great.
free way to do it.
It's
right?
a free way to do it. And honestly, if you want it to be super simple, you could literally just lay down cardboard and put mulch on top of it and say, that's my sheet mulch. You're not.
Dear Nancy.
I did that.
You're not getting a ton of nutrition that way. A sort of step above that would be cardboard and then compost and then mulch. But if you want to build diversity in the soil, like think of it like you're having a potluck for a bunch of friends. If you just have one item to eat on the plate is mulch, probably some of your friends are like, I'm not coming to that potluck because I don't like mulch. So we want to have as many different foods at the potluck so everybody likes things. So we're going to add things like grass clipping and hay and straw
But nothing with a lot of seeds, right?
Well, it depends where you put it in the pile and how long the pile is going to decompose. I'm not really afraid of hay. People get really afraid of hay, but it's a super high nutrition and seeds just show up. They just do. And I find the weeds that pop up with hay pretty easy to pull. And as long as we bury it deep enough in the sheet mulch, most of those weeds don't come up. So I just like to alternate things that are really nitrogen rich with things that are carbon rich. And I put the bigger things on the bottom and the smaller things on the top. I like frost it at the top with some compost and then cover it for a season. And the next
How
thing
are you building it?
you see my hand going up.
Yes, I was
It
watching
was
that.
high.
Yeah. When my dream sheet mulch probably is a solid foot tall when I'm
I don't
done
think
building.
anybody has said dream sheet mulch on this
I said it 4
podcast
times
before.
today already.
Yeah.
You have.
No, but I think also, especially one of the things that's amazing in a sheet mulch is deciduous leaves. Again, you want to be cautious about where you're raking them from because they could have jumping worms in
Not
them.
oak.
Even oak would be fine, just not walnut.
Geez, it's like you can make no mistakes. Jenny says you can make no mistakes.
Walnut
No,
and
Except for
she
the
already
dry
told you
cardboard.
made one.
Walnut and cedar would be your mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you want not too much pine. Pine is usually okay. If you have super acidic a soil, it's not great. In my case, I have basic soil, so pine is wonderful.
But like pine needles, like a ton of them, it's probably going to make it too acidic. Right?
Yeah, and it's just you're not getting a lot of
gonna take
organic
a ton.
matter either.
Yeah.
So having deciduous leaves, you can have quite a bit, 6 or 8 inches, and it composts
And you
down
don't
to
have to
next to
chop
nothing.
them up. You just throw them on.
You can throw them right on. If you chop them up, like run them over with your mulching mower, they'll decompose faster.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm paranoid about oak trees because I've got a lot of oaks around me. And
Do you think Nancy's well on her way to making her garden?
No, we're not finished. Nancy needs now. Her mulch thingy is about a foot.
She's got a gorgeous
And
sheet
you've
mulch.
got it topped off.
Yep.
So she's got the dream sheet mulch.
She's
Now
got the
what's
dream
next?
sheet mulch, and she did this in the spring. When can she start playing with
Was a
it?
good question.
Yeah, this is a great question. So it depends what she wants to plant. Let's say she does it as soon as the snow melts, right down in the Hudson Valley. So I don't know, that could be anywhere from April to June, depending
It's
on
like
the
January
Yeah.
now.
Oh, yeah, January.
Climate
Okay.
change.
Okay, so she does that then. And so when you have a new sheet mulch that's not totally decomposed, you're better off starting with starts, like little plants, as opposed to direct seeding.
Like plugs.
Yeah, plugs, exactly. So pretty early in the season, you could just pull apart a little spot in the sheet mulch that you know you want to put a plant in, fill it with some compost, and just put it right in there.
So how does she pick the companions that she's putting in there?
Well, the great news is that I love the internet for gardening because it's all in there. It'll all be in my book. But also
But
you
you
can
might give us some links to some good things
Yeah.
before your book.
Sure,
Right?
yes.
Okay, good.
And yeah, there's lots of information out there. Now, the thing with companion planting and with gardening in general is, I mean, I'm speaking for Cornell University, so I have to give you this caveat, is that at Cornell, we only promote things that are from peer-reviewed scientific publications.
Right.
Now, how many of those do you think are done about gardening? Gardening is like next to none, right? Because we're not an economic driver, so the money for the research, you know, we're having like bake sales to fund gardening positions, right?
Wow, we
Yeah.
love this point of view.
So that means there's a lot of information that like your grandmother knows and my grandmother knows and your neighbor knows, and we all know it's true, and it's never been peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Grandma.com?
Grandma.com, yeah. And so companion planting falls in that category. There's a lot of quote unquote unsubstantiated information out there that's been passed down from generations, and no one's confirmed that it's true. That said, I know that I use this in my garden, and it looks better than everyone else's. Not everyone else's,
And
but
even though it's not scientific, like if you were going to talk about that, but you wouldn't be certifying this or anything, which companion plants would you use?
you mean for my new gardener?
Yeah.
For
Oh,
Nancy's.
especially because our sheet mulch is not fully decomposed yet, I would probably throw like an echinacea in there.
Because it'll be aggressive and fill out.
It'll just fill out quickly. It's really tough. Maybe I would buy a little flat of zinnias, sunflowers. You can never go wrong with sunflowers. Everybody loves sunflowers, including
like
bees and birds.
Annual sunflowers?
Yeah,
you're talking about?
absolutely. And
There's a
especially,
million of them, yeah.
yep.
Teddy bear.
Early in the sheet mulch, right? Got to remember this thing's going to decompose, right? That's one of our processes is decomposition. So it's going to get shorter. So like woody perennials, we don't want to plant those yet because we got to wait until this soil level is more stable. So we're talking about perennials that are much more short-lived than a woody plant.
How about like bee balm?
Yeah, bee balm would be lovely. It just depends on your soil type. So,
Yeah.
you know, bee balm and echinacea like different soils. One likes
They
wet,
do?
one likes
Okay.
yeah, one likes wet. Like
Well,
one
I
likes
plant
dry.
them together. So
I do
they're-
too.
yeah,
I mean,
okay.
they
They
both
didn't read the book.
What else? I just
So just the classics.
I would go with the classics,
There's
and I would.
12 classics. You just pick some of them and plunk them in.
And what I say for a new gardener is always just like make a list of the 10 plants you're most interested in harvesting from your garden, and then check with another gardener or a website to make sure they're easy to grow, and then grow those.
I think your publisher should call your book "No Guilt Gardening."
No guilt.
Because it feels like there's no guilt. I mean, because really, it's kind of like you should plant a lot of different things, and there's not a lot of mistakes you can make, right?
I wouldn't say there's like no mistakes.
No, I
Tim
mean,
keeps
I would
trying
make the
for that.
mistakes. I'm looking for the mistakes.
Yeah.
But it seems pretty simple, right?
I think it's pretty simple. And, you know, so a lot of times people, they come to I teach a lot of gardening classes, and they come to my classes and they ask me questions. They're like, oh my gosh, you like know everything, which is like 1,000% not true. But when someone asks me a question, if I'm not sure what the answer is, the thing that's happening in my brain while I'm answering the question is, well, how does this work in a forest? Or how does this work in a prairie? Okay, I know how this works in a forest. I'm just going to now translate that to the garden ecosystem and answer the question, because the laws of nature really are the laws of nature, and they are regardless of if it's a human created habitat or nature's done its thing. And so once you understand these ecosystem principles, the guesswork is gone.
Well, and we're kind of the ones who've messed it up, right? I mean, when we intervene, if we intervene in a heavy-handed way, we're the ones who have messed it up. I mean, with all the pesticides and herbicides and things like that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you're trying to control things too much, that's when you really mess things up, it seems like.
That's one of the things we could talk about for the new gardener too. One of my rules of, I'm not a big rule person. I don't know if you've noticed that about me yet.
And also no guilt. She's my new therapist too,
However,
by the way.
Yeah, I'll send you a bill. No, just kidding. One of my rules is always avoid large-scale, irreversible change. Really simple rule, right? If you do something and you can't undo that, that's bad. That would be the mistake, and I would even let you feel guilty about that, Tim. Okay.
I mean, I really like the concept of small, and that's what I always tell people too. It's like, oh, I've got this huge yard, and I want to do small, right?
Start small and do it well.
And get some success, right?
And get some success under your belt, learn the techniques, start to learn what thrives in your soil. One of the keys to ecological gardening is putting the right plants in the right place at the right time. It's kind of rule number one. So if you have soil that's really sandy and you put a bunch of plants in there that don't like sandy soil, guess what you're going to need in order to make it work? A whole bunch of chemicals, right? So part of it is we don't try and grow a forest that's supposed to grow on top of a mountain right next to the ocean, right? You're going to grow a montane forest ecosystem there. And so we need to look at our soil, understand our climate, understand the water, and then plant accordingly.
And it's pretty easy these days to, if you have sandy soil, to find out pretty easily what grows well on sandy soil, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's part of what's so great about the time we're living in, as opposed to all the other things that aren't so great, but that's a great thing.
Yeah, we can really lean into all the information that's really, truly at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about seed saving?
I want to ask you about seed saving because I don't know if I'm doing it the right way. And I have lots and lots of native perennials, and I go out and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. Is there a proper way to do that? I know that some seeds, a lot of seeds need to be cold stratified. So I cut them and then I throw them all over the place, and then it becomes winter, and then they grow or they don't grow. Is that right?
I mean, that's one way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. I mean, let's talk about for a second the why of seed saving, because I think that's important for people, because some people might just be like, well, I'll just go buy seeds. I don't have time for that. So there's a couple of things going on. I mean, first of all, I would like to just start by saying that I think seed saving is a revolutionary act, truly revolutionary. There are a lot of things that are out of control in our lives. And by actually saving our own seeds, we're taking our food supply into our own hands. And, not to sound totally anti-capitalist, but we're also fighting against some pretty big influences in the world, corporations that have control over that. And a lot of those corporations are doing a lot of things that are resulting in the degradation of our environment. It's why we all need to do this now. So I really think that seed saving is a truly revolutionary act. We have each of our gardens is really truly different, its own habitat, its own climate. And the plants that are most adapted to your spot are the plants that are growing well on your spot, right? So if you're saving those seeds, now you're slowly helping the genetics be more and more geared toward the place that you are growing, right? So your soils. And it could be just, we could think about regionally, the Hudson Valley is one thing, but then maybe there's the west side of a river and the east side of a river, or maybe there's the soils that are sandier toward the river, and you can be trading seeds with people that live in a similar habitat to you. So we're getting super adapted.
So let me ask you a really specific example. So I have ironweed growing, and it has beautiful seeds, and they're pretty viable usually, right? So what you're saying is I cut my ironweed seed pods and I give them to my neighbor, because I know that these are probably the seeds that have survived and the plants that have done well that are going to do well in that person's yard as well. Is that kind of an example of what you're saying?
Yep. Yeah. Look at, as long as their habitat is similar to yours. And I think also, a lot of the things that we want to see growing out there in the ecosystem, they're not seeds you can just go on the internet and buy, right? So by saving these seeds, we can really start to change the trajectory of what ends up on the landscape. And we're also really getting a chance to examine what does well where we are and create more of that.
Okay, seed saving sounds nice and easy. You go out and you cut some seeds and you hand them to the neighbor and it's all set. You have to select, you have to collect, you have to make sure that they get planted and correctly, and you have to make sure that they survive. So you don't just go out and grab a bunch of seeds and consider yourself a seed saver. So it's a multi-step
I think
thing.
I just got dissed. I mean...
No, it's okay.
No, I'm expanding.
But you can do that, right? I mean, You can be very specific and put them in certain bins and blah, blah, blah. But you also can just cut off the top of your plant and go throw it in some bare earth. And maybe it will do well and maybe it won't. But it probably will if it's growing close to that area, right?
It just depends on what else is competing with it, right? Like, so out in wild nature, a lot of the invasives, like you said, they might have a leg up. So we can put them in more and more controlled environments. I'm going to play therapist again and say, instead of you
For
have
me or him?
for you,
Well, I
Jean,
think we both
instead
need
of
therapists.
instead of you have to do that, you get to do that, because there is nothing more fun than going out, in my opinion, and harvesting seeds. It is so fun. And then taking those seeds and on a snowy or rainy day, organizing them into the right envelopes and thinking about where you're going to plant them, and then going through the process of sowing those seeds and growing them out and then sharing them with people. For me, it's honestly one of the greatest joys that a human can experience. So if you're having a bad day, go save some seeds and you will feel better.
Can I get ice cream after?
You can get ice cream after.
I'm going to skip the seeds and do the ice cream.
There you go.
No, I end up every spring with my pretty little box with my pretty little labeled seeds. And then 6 weeks later, I go back and say, oh, crap, I forgot to do anything with these. And some of them have mold growing on them and stuff. So this is not a natural thing for me.
Right. Okay. So there is a process. So we'll start with, they have to be dry. They have to be stored in a cool, dry place. Easy enough thing to do is when you, first of all, harvest them in the afternoon once the dew has done its thing. We don't want to harvest them in the morning when they're just naturally a lot more humidity in the atmosphere. So we harvest them in the afternoon, put them in a place. I usually like to use an open paper bag, or if there's any dampness, even just sit them out on a paper towel for a little while just to let them dry out. Eventually, they're going to be going into either seed envelopes, or I also like to use glass jars. Obviously, if they're going into glass jars, they have to be totally dry. And it sort of depends on the seed, too. Like a hard seed, like a bean, you're not going to end up with a ton of mold issues. Maybe something like, I'm just trying to think of some cool aster, like New England aster or some goldenrod seeds. Those are a lot more prone to molding. You need to make sure they're good and dry and go through that process. And then
And where do you store them then?
Well, I like to use little coin envelopes or even old garden seed envelopes. I put them in there, and then I have some like seed Rubbermaid bins, like little smaller ones that they go into. If you want to make sure they stay really dry, there's those desiccated silica packets that come in pill bottles.
Yeah, save them for all your pill
You
bottles.
can save those and reuse those. You can also purchase them, but you can reuse them. There's a whole process. We look on the internet about how to make them dry again, and throw a few of those in there to keep the moisture out, and then put it it's very important that it goes in a cool, dry place. I had one year where I just threw them up in my attic, and it kind of forgot that my attic gets to 80 degrees or 90 degrees when the wood stove is going. Not where you want them. But
I did that with cannas one year.
Yeah.
But,
so you don't want to do that.
Refrigerator, maybe?
The refrigerator is a little humid. So if they're in a glass jar, they could go in the refrigerator. A freezer is less humid than a refrigerator. So that's a better place.
And it's not too cold?
And it's not too cold.
Okay.
So, yep.
Even annual seeds you can put in there?
Annual
in a
seeds.
freezer?
Yep.
Huh.
But I like to just keep them in the back of, I just find the coldest closet in my house, like that one wall that didn't quite get insulated properly, and I put them in the back of that closet.
Okay. I'm thinking there's room in my freezer because we've cleaned it out, so maybe we'll do that. We always ask the question of folks, the world is a pretty challenging place. So what gives you hope every day? And you're like a very hopeful person, and I need to call you on a weekly basis to feel better. So tell us what gives you hope.
I am a very hopeful person.
Yeah, you are. That's great. We love that.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. Nature does give me hope. I mean, whenever I get despair, just like everybody else, even though I try and think positive. And every time I'm like, I can't do this, I just go outside in nature, even though it's not going to work this time. I'm too upset. And it works every time. And I often go out there with a basket and maybe my pruners and collect some wild herbs or collect things from my garden. It's something tangible to hold in my hand. I feel connected to nature. I remember that I'm part of nature. I remember those relationships, and I just feel hopeful. The other thing that gives me hope is the young people. And I know we always say this, but I'm a mother, and they are more aware than us. They're smarter than us. They have more tools than us. They're motivated. They are doing things. They are not taking no for an answer anymore, and they give me a lot of hope.
Oh, that's great. Again, we need to surround ourselves with young people. Could we just hire some or something, do you think?
Well, I think that would be a start.
This has been terrific. It's been really interesting talking to you. I've learned a lot. I know Jean has learned a lot because there's
And
so
Nancy
much
is going to be thrilled.
Nancy has her program.
Send me a
in
picture of
place.
your garden next year, Nancy.
No, but we really appreciate you taking your time. We're really looking forward to seeing your book when it comes out. We're going to let people know when it comes out. Should we help her edit it so she can get it out fast?
Teresa can fix it.
Yeah. No,
We're just waiting on the publisher, to be honest. It's
really,
ready to go.
Thank you so much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. We've had a great time.
It's been great to chat with you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Powers and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities.